Welcome. Look at this tower standing firm against the storm. This isn't just a fortress of stone, it represents a fortress of the mind. We are entering the world of Michel de Montaigne. In the late 1500s, amidst a France torn apart by civil war and intolerance, Montaigne made a radical choice. He retreated to his estate to search for an honest self in a world of lies. His tool? A new genre he invented, the essay. But to understand why he felt the need to lock himself away, we first need to look at the storm raging outside his walls. To understand why Montaigne turned his gaze inward, we must first look at the world he was trying to escape. The 16th century was not just a time of Renaissance beauty, it was devastated by plagues and the brutal wars of religion. France was fractured. Catholics and Protestants were locked in a cycle of violent dogmatism. In this era, truth wasn't a philosophical goal to be shared, it was a weapon used to justify slaughter. It was this external chaos that drove Montaigne to seek sanity within. But who exactly was the man standing in the eye of this storm? So, who steps into this chaotic, war-torn landscape? Meet Michel Eyquem, better known by the name of his estate, Montaigne. He wasn't born into ancient aristocracy. He was the eldest son of a wealthy merchant family that had only recently ascended to nobility. This position is crucial. He became a magistrate and a diplomat, tasked with the nearly impossible job of navigating a France that was tearing itself apart. But how do you maintain your integrity when your country is fractured by fanaticism? Montaigne's answer began with a radical upbringing. Let's look at the unique education that shaped this independent mind. But before his public life began, Montaigne underwent a fascinating pedagogical experiment. His father, inspired by the humanist Erasmus, believed in an education of tenderness, not force. Imagine this. The young Montaigne wasn't drilled in a harsh classroom. Instead, he was raised speaking Latin as his first language, simply because his tutors spoke nothing else to him. This gentle immersion worked. It instilled a deep love of reading and a lifelong skepticism toward the severe, dogmatic discipline of formal institutions. It was this unique, emotional openness that prepared him for the most defining relationship of his life. From the quiet discipline of his early education, Montaigne entered the public world as a magistrate in Bordeaux. Yet the most pivotal moment of his youth wasn't legal or political, it was personal. At 22, he meets Etienne de la Boétie. La Boétie was a fellow magistrate and a brilliant political thinker, but for Montaigne, he became much more. He describes their first encounter at a crowded city feast as something predestined, a fateful force that united them instantly. He claimed, "We sought each other before we had ever met." This wasn't just networking, it was a collision of souls that would define Montaigne's life forever, creating a bond so profound that, as we'll see next, it almost defies explanation. This brings us to perhaps the most famous line in all of Montaigne's work. When trying to explain the inexplicable force that drew him to La Boétie, Montaigne admits defeat in the face of logic. He simply states, "Because it was he, because it was I." Here, Montaigne distinguishes this perfect friendship from ordinary relationships based on utility or circumstance. For him, this bond was a fusion of souls, so complete that the seam joining them disappeared. It is a connection beyond language, a mysterious, destined union that requires no justification other than the existence of the two individuals themselves. Tragically, this perfect union was cut short. At just 32 years old, La Boétie died from dysentery, leaving Montaigne utterly inconsolable. He famously wrote that he felt he had lost half of his own life. But For us, as students of his work, this loss is critical. It is the catalyst for the essay. With his soulmate gone, Montaigne no longer had anyone to talk to who fully understood him. So he began a conversation with himself. This grief forced him to turn inward, using the page as a mirror to replace the friend he had lost. Yet, despite this retreat into himself, the world outside still demanded his attention. Following the personal tragedy of losing La Boétie, Montaigne found himself in the middle of a national tragedy, the French Wars of Religion. As you can see on the map, he literally stood between two firing lines, Henri of Navarre's Protestants and the Duke of Guise's Catholic League. In an era of treachery, Montaigne wielded a strange diplomatic weapon, radical honesty. He refused to deceive anyone, operating on the dangerous principle that I prefer to fail in my mission than to fail myself. Paradoxically, this refusal to play political games earned him the trust of both warring factions. But, as we'll see, this heavy burden of public service eventually drove him to seek a very different kind of life. Yet, despite his success as a negotiator, the public world eventually broke his heart. By 1572, at just 39 years old, Montaigne was exhausted. He had suffered immense personal tragedy, losing his soulmate La Boétie, and, devastatingly, 5 of his 6 daughters in infancy. Disillusioned with political solutions and the chaos of the religious wars, he retired to the round tower of his chateau. He locked himself away not just to escape, but to investigate the only reality he could still trust, his own mind. This retreat marks the birth of a new literary genre, the essays. Secluded in his library, Montaigne creates something entirely new, the essay. Unlike St. Augustine, who wrote about himself to demonstrate religious faith, Montaigne's goal is a meticulous secular exploration of his own mind, stripped of all ideological assumptions. He arrives at a radical revelation. Since absolute objective truth is often beyond our reach, the only truth we can genuinely attain is in the first person. We must renounce dogmatic certainty. This intellectual humility is the key to understanding why he chose the specific title Essays, or Attempts, which we will define in the next slide. When Montaigne titled his work Essays, he meant the word literally. These were trials or attempts to test his own judgment. Unlike previous philosophers who built rigid systems, Montaigne offers us a record of a mind in motion. Across 107 chapters, he freely explores everything from high philosophy to superstition and even his own sleep habits. This reflects his unique brand of skepticism. It's not about denying that truth exists, it's a refusal to ever stop searching for it. And this relentless searching led him to grapple with the one certainty we all face, our own mortality. If the essays capture a mind in constant motion, what is the ultimate destination? For Montaigne, the core insight is this: to philosophize is to learn how to die. This isn't about morbidity, it is about liberation. Synthesizing the wisdom of the ancients, Montaigne argues that fearing the end makes us slaves to the future. Conversely, keeping this refrain of mortality in our heads forces us to truly inhabit the present. As he famously notes, he who has learned how to die has unlearned to be a slave. Once we accept this ultimate limit on our existence, we are ready to confront the limits of our knowledge as well. If facing death requires courage, this next insight requires profound humility. Montaigne targets here the folly of false certainty. He realized that rejecting something just because it seems unlikely to us, whether it be the sorcery of his time or strange phenomena, is actually an act of arrogance. As he puts it, to decree something impossible is to try and fit the infinite power of nature into the tiny box of our own understanding. This is the essence of his skepticism. It isn't a denial of truth, but a refusal to mistake our own mental limits for the limits of the universe. And just as we often misjudge reality, we also tend to misjudge time, constantly ignoring the present moment. Montaigne applies his skepticism not just to knowledge, but to how we experience time itself. He captures a core human anxiety with the insight that we are never at home, we are always beyond it. We allow fear, desire, and hope to constantly push us toward the future, effectively robbing us of the present, the only moment we actually possess. Unlike the ancient Stoics who scolded this restlessness, Montaigne observes it with characteristic compassion. He knows it is natural, but he invites us to stop running and appreciate what is. It is this gentle, radical honesty that makes his essays a mirror for every generation, leading us perfectly into our final conclusion. Ultimately, Montaigne didn't write his essays to set himself up as a statue or a perfect model to be imitated. Instead, he offers us a mirror. By documenting his own changing mind, his doubts, his conflicting emotions, and even his mundane habits, he created an honest reflection of what it actually means to be human. He teaches us that truth isn't a fixed destination, but a constant, personal journey. So, as we conclude, I invite you to look into this mirror. In reading Montaigne's radical honesty, you might just find, as he promised, a part of yourself staring back.